My special guest today is Cameron Peake. She's a partner at the Financial Venture Studio. Cameron is an entrepreneurial leader who has built, launched, and scaled fintech companies around the world. Previously, she was the CEO and co-founder at Aslo. There, she grew the company to 150 employees, 1 billion in deposits, supported the financial and business needs of thousands of small entrepreneurs, including myself, and was recognized as one of Fortune magazine's 40 under 40 for her work to deliver financial services to businesses impacted by COVID. Welcome to the show, Cameron.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Nice. Well, you're a partner at Financial Venture Studios, and you've got this awesome background in banking. Would you just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what Financial Venture Studios does and your experience at Aslo?
Sure. Yeah. Well, pretty much my whole career has been spent leveraging digital channels in some way to improve or expand financial services. So, early in my career, I actually launched different banking and payment products in places like Zimbabwe and Indonesia and the Philippines and Haiti, and then pivoted a little bit closer to home, which is, from where I started Aslo. So, Aslo, digital bank for small businesses, particularly focused on supporting, smaller or newer entrepreneurs, and, had a really great run. I think we helped to lead the improved transformation of, SMB banking here in the US. And again, took it from, idea to scale, bigger concept, and really recognized how the way you operate and your leadership style just needs to change over time. So that was an amazing experience. And then, afterwards, I spent some time advising, fintech founders, got a lot of energy from that. And so as I thought about my next move, I continue to remain really passionate about improving financial services, financial systems, but saw an opportunity to do that through helping and coaching founders as opposed to just doing it in a one-to-one relationship, building it directly myself. So joined FVS Financial Venture Studio. I've known most of the team for a while over there. I thought they were doing just an awesome job in terms of providing both capital and operational support to early stage fintech founders. So that was the motivation for me. And then FVS at a high level, we, again, pre-seed and seed stage fintech VC firm. We provide deep operational support to founders. So myself and another partner, former fintech founder CEOs, Brian, who started the fund, deep expertise in fintech as well. And so we're in the trenches with our portfolio companies every week, every other week, working through everything from, regulation, vendor stack issues, fraud, first hire, go to market. So it's been super fun just with that level of support. And we also run a program where we've distilled down what we think is the most important things to launch a company in fintech. So again, things like regulation, investors, customer acquisition, people day, and we'll make one-to-one connections and also bring other founders to kind of do case studies. And the goal is helping our founders get access to the connections and the knowledge to help them launch and grow more quickly.
Wow, that's an awesome background. I can totally relate as someone who works at a startup, and I actually used Aslo for my own small business banking, and it was such a great niche that you were able to fill there. I could see, most of the business banking that I had experienced was super outdated and really hard to work with. And as a small business owner, that's stressful and slows you down. And so I actually loved using Aslo, and being a venture-backed startup, I totally get what you're doing at FVS. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things you're noticing as a partner at FVS?
Yeah.
You mentioned to me that you're seeing increased verticalization, like more fintech services are going into banking and changing that for businesses. But like, how is that increased verticalization playing out in industries where you didn't used to see any impact from this kind of like startup culture?
Yeah, I think that's one of the really cool things to see. Like, we are seeing more and more companies where it doesn't necessarily look like a fintech company on the surface, but it actually is under the hood. So, one of our companies, they essentially target the education space. They work with school districts where they still continue to pay their vendors via paper check. And so the idea is to kill the paper check, right? Digitize those payments. And I think, had we been looking at this 5, 10 years ago, there's no way they would do it. Like, there's a lot of resistance around digital channels, and these big mega industries are actually starting to digitize. And my hypothesis is, some of the things like Aslo and a lot of the cool consumer apps we've been doing have been, accepted more broadly. And so these deeper, more regulated industries, these kind of more, slow to adopt industries are starting to change a little bit. So I think that's been a really exciting thing to see.
Wow, when you think about a school being part of the fintech revolution, it's like the last place I would imagine. What's so like? There's been this huge push in all these other industries. You got companies like Stripe and Plaid and data providers delivering via API, and things are really innovating quickly and changing fast. And so it's coming in to these legacy industries basically. This now everybody's adopting it. You're seeing it in places you didn't see it. Is there a resistance? Is it hard to get these late movers on board with better user experience and things like that?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the most tangible components of saying it was in the past, I was launching different, what they were called agent networks in Africa and Latin America. And it's essentially the brick and mortar human footprint that allows people to put cash into the system and exchange it for digital currencies or digital goods. Um, and that was the front lines of people not being familiar with the technology, just the importance of education. A lot of the time, it's how does this work? What's in it for me? Kind of any sort of basic sales pitch. And I think that applies a lot today to new industries, right? Like, how does it work? Is this going to benefit me? And so it just requires a lot of education, kind of direct interactions to explain the benefit. So to me, it's kind of, after being in here for a while, it's kind of a story we've seen again and again in different flavors anytime a new technology is rolled out to, a new market that hasn't experienced it before.
That makes a lot of sense. I don't spend enough time on that probably is educating people why you'd want to use a platform like Intrinio's or, what is the benefit that you could achieve because you kind of assume that people will see the benefit, but if they're not used to working in that industry, a little bit of education will go a long way. Um, can we talk a little bit about a different industry that I think is not that far along in the cycle? It's this Web 3.0,
Yeah.
and you're already talking a little bit about crypto. Like, educate us about it a little bit. Are you seeing this start to go mainstream? I mean, more people investing in crypto, and what does Web 3 even mean? For some of our listeners are probably more technical, but I
Yeah.
don't think even that audience is fully up to speed on what's coming. And it sounds like you're
Yeah.
starting to see it all over the place.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. We recently ran an analysis of our deals in the past quarter, and again, there's a ton of funds out there that are crypto specific or Web3 specific, and that's not us. We're fintech, but there's obviously a lot of overlap. And 10% of the deals that we got were related to essentially mainstreaming Web3 or mainstreaming crypto. So I think it shows how much energy and excitement's going into the space right now, and we're seeing a lot of innovation. But I'd say, for us, given our depth of history in the financial services ecosystem here in the US, we can add just a ton of value where there's this mainstreaming crypto kind of bridge to the traditional finance world. And so again, that's where we're seeing a lot of energy. But I think the exciting thing is as we look at the future, that means it's just going to be much more pervasive to an everyday audience. So, my mom, your mom, we may be in a world where they're actually using Web3 technologies in some capacity because there's a lot of money and energy and excitement going into this space right now. And, in terms of what it means, the way I think about it broadly is it means that it's a decentralized architecture. So in the past, where you've seen kind of mega companies control the experience, the strategy, kind of the engagement, the philosophy behind Web3 is this decentralization. So it's more in the hands of users, whether that's, I want to own and control my data and actually monetize that, or I want to, in the case of like a DAO, have an active role in defining the future or the strategy of an organization. So that's kind of the overarching concept. There's often a token associated with it because typically there's some sort of action that goes along with decentralization, but that's the overarching concept.
If people are used to a world where things are centralized, like you've got a network controlled by one company or even an individual, do you have to get, or are these startups that are going to start coming through your pipeline that you're investing in and you're helping to grow? Like, do you think they're going to have an education component to get people thinking in a different way, similar to how you did with banking and in emerging markets? Like, are consumers like your mom, my mom, are they going to have to think, I'm part of a network now that doesn't have that centralized control? Are they going to have an education component as well?
I could totally see that happening. I mean, I think each company takes a little bit of a different flavor, right? But I could completely see that happening. I mean, if you were, a company where I need to establish my own, I don't know, I'm making this up, but let's say I'm a risk company and I want to set my own algorithm for how I feel comfortable with a financial services company assessing me. That might mean, educating someone about what their information means, how it's being used, and the fact that that can be in the power of your own hands. So again, this is a completely fictitious concept, but understanding, you know, all of those components and power being more in your hands, I think would obviously require some kind of educational concept. And so, depending on the company, I can absolutely see that being a need.
Yeah, I love it. So you talked earlier a little bit about some of the ways you help startups, in your role. Can you talk a little bit about the leadership component? This is something I think about a lot at work. I think about it myself as a leader. Um,
Yeah.
and I was checking out your website today, and anybody who's listening along wants to check it out. It's finventurestudio.com. You talk on there about the different styles of leadership, this authentic style of leadership. Can you say what that means and how it's different from leadership types that we're usually exposed to in the startup world?
Yeah. I I it's something that I'm really passionate about, I think one big realization for me at Aslo was when we stopped being small enough to kind of demonstrate your worth through hard work, right? And like you need to be a leader, a figurehead in front of the organization. Like, the scope of your role shifts. And what I found was that a lot of the leadership archetypes that were celebrated. I mean, we're looking at on TV right now a profile of a lot of entrepreneurs that were kind of lauded as the hacker, the aggressive CEO. A lot of those didn't feel accessible to me. And so it took me a while to realize that I was going to be most successful just by focusing on me, right? The strengths that I brought, really feeling confident with what those instincts meant, especially in the face of great leaders that I may have brought in who brought a lot of those qualities. Um, and so I realized that I was most successful when I just understood my values, my leadership strengths, and really leaned into them. But it took me a little while. And I think one thing I'm really excited to do with founders is first, you know, enable them to understand that their innate strengths, their cores are what's going to make them most successful. And then secondly, think about how you start to codify that in terms of values, in terms of how you show up in front of the company, how you make decisions to really help you scale better. Because if you think about it, your company at 20 people, you can get in the room and engage with them kind of in a work oriented, easy fashion. But as you get to 100 people, you need to have those values that you want to set forward for the company and how you want to make decisions as a leader within that company. You need to codify them in a way where everyone can grasp onto them and everyone can use them as a shorthand. And so there's techniques and strategies you can do to make that much easier for you.
Tell me a little more about those techniques and strategies. Like I've got
Yeah.
leaders on my team and I want them to embody us, not try
Yeah.
to embody some other company, and try to
Yeah.
be like them. How do
Totally.
you teach that? How do you spread that throughout the
Totally.
organization?
I mean, I think the first thing, one as a leader, as a founder, is making sure that you understand your strengths and are really in tune with yourself. I think that's kind of the initial building block, and it's important for everyone to do. But then the second thing is, what is the culture of the company I'm trying to create? What are the values I'm trying to create, or what's already working, and how do we codify them? And a lot of time you see values and they're kind of squishy or they don't mean anything, right? Like you go to big companies and the values be nice, right? And it's like this doesn't feel very meaningful. And so what's really meaningful and important to you? And start to codify them in a really meaningful way. So I mean at Aslo, there's a couple of things that we did. One was we codified them and we reinforced them. And we did that through, value awards, really recognizing who was doing something right and pointing out the why. So it's not just about getting a gift certificate or something else, but using it as a teaching moment for the rest of the company. Um, And then we also started to do things like what the values mean and what they aren't, because people can start to interpret them in different ways and kind of use them as a means to their own end, right? So it's this continued cycle of kind of education and making sure everyone realizes what they look like. And then we actually started to use that in things like hiring, right? So as we brought on a new recruit, a person may be great, but they may not align with your culture. And that just means that they're a great person, but not a fit for your company. And so we actually started to use it as a screen and a tool for hiring as well. And that meant that our culture, even though a company's culture is going to evolve a little bit over time, it meant that it was more cohesive. And so those were a couple of things that we did, but it meant that as we scaled, people could use values as a decision making tool, right? If we really care about, like, one of our values at Aslo was about being direct. Dealing with small business owners, they don't have time for flowery language and a lot of other things. So let's be concise, direct, respectful. And so if you think about it, if I'm a customer service agent, um, that's really important in how I show up and engage and make decisions and interact with our customers. And you can just use that for everything from like UX decision making to product decision making. And the idea was that those values could be a template so that as we grow and get to 100, 150 people or even more, you don't have to kind of send everything up the chain for decision making, which really slows you down. You have a toolkit to make those decisions and those actions closer to your line of work. So that's one really important template for how we grew and scaled.
Yeah, I love it. Does it translate into the brand? Like, can customers tell if you've done a good job of this, and then do you get more customers because of it?
I think so. I mean, uh, ideally, it's imbued across your entire organization, and that's how you're running it internally and how you show up in the market. Um, I think so, 100%. I mean, we were really about empowerment was another value for us. And again, that we talked about empowerment in terms of how we use values for decision making. But if you also think about empowerment, one big thing we did for our customers was and you may have realized this as well, was we did a lot of educational content because we wanted to empower our business owners to succeed and kind of be their best, grow their businesses to where they wanted to be. And so we provided content for the first time that a lot of these entrepreneurs had never seen. And we saw one that they said, "Hey, you're not like another bank." And two, we saw that that led to more referrals and more users. And so I just think this is all kind of intermixed. And so I absolutely think it reflects in how you show up. I absolutely think it drives more users if you do it right, because you have a really genuine relationship with your customers.
Yeah, I could tell when I worked with Aslo, and I think that is going to create a better company, a stronger company, because the experience the users are going to get interacting with your technology and also your team is going to be unique to that organization because it's reflecting the founder's values instead of some other values. I mean,
Totally.
have you seen this? Can this go? And you mentioned a second ago about hijacking the values, and you've got to kind of constantly nurture this organizational leadership style to be authentic. Have you noticed companies go haywire, and then this leads to some bad outcomes if you don't take care of this part of your business?
Yeah. Well, and one more thing about that flywheel is that we also saw it created a flywheel from a hiring standpoint too, right? Because
Mm,
you codify your values, you find people that align with them, and they're way more likely to refer others. They're more likely to stick around because they kind of know what they're getting into and they're participating in it. And then to your question, kind of on the contrary, I think I where I've seen it go wrong are in two areas. One is you just don't codify them. And so you're rushing, you're growing really quickly. You're trying to bring on any sort of person you get in the door that's good or half good
mm,
because you just need another body. And that's where your culture really starts to get diluted. And there's people that come in that just bring different perspectives. And that's not always a bad thing. Like, you want a diversity of perspectives typically. But let me give you an example. Like I mentioned, one of ours were empowerment. And if I were bringing on a lot of leaders that had very centralized tendencies, either they would absolutely fail and crash, or they'd start to take that away and there'd be battles for control and battles for decision making.
Mm,
And that would kind of kill what was important and what we set, right? And so
sure.
that's where I think if you don't codify them and you're not intentional about using it and incorporating it across your business, it can start to kill what you've built. Um, and then the other way I've seen it go wrong is you just kind of have lifeless values, right? It's this exercise that you feel like you have to do because everyone does it and it just doesn't mean anything. And that's again
Mm.
where it just has a muted outcome that doesn't really matter because you don't actually use it as a guide. You don't actually kind of live and breathe it from a leadership standpoint, and it just kind of can die because it's a little bit lifeless.
It's inauthentic. Yeah.
Totally.
People
Yeah,
if
exactly.
right, if it's inauthentic, it's almost worse than not having anything at all because it's almost like a waste of everyone's time. It's like a
Totally.
distraction for no reason. And so you're in this role now as a partner at Financial Venture Studio, and you're trying to get founders to focus on this, right? That's part of the value of working with FVS instead of some other company that's just going to throw money at you and let you figure it out yourself. How do you get these very busy founders, people that don't have time, they're struggling to launch and they're probably writing code and they're just in the weeds. How do you get them to stop and take the time to find these things so that they can hire the right people?
Yeah. I mean, there's been a couple of different ways. And again, at the end of the day, i- as with anything, you kind of give advice, and some people are going to follow it, and some are going to do things their own way. And ideally, you end up at the right path regardless. But there's been a couple of ways it's come up so far. One is, where people are really excited about it. I've done founder real talk, so like, in the first few weeks, I'm like, this is what I learned. I just want to pass it on to you, and that's been really awesome. And then, with some companies, they're growing kind of the first thing, right? They're growing really fast. They're just trying to get anyone in. And, I had a conversation with a portfolio company a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, listen, I'm coming from the future. And like, if you don't get this under control, it's going to be a much harder and much bigger fix for you down the line. So spend a little bit of time to focus on it now. You're going to retain more control over your culture, and it's going to make you much happier in the long run if you take a little bit of time and do it up
Mm.
front. And so again, we'll see where it goes, but at the end of the day, it's it's nice because you've seen these things play out again. You can take a little bit of perspective over the arc of a company, and hopefully it helps just make the company grow more effectively.
I love that idea. I'm from the future. I've done this at my company. We've lost control of the culture. We've taken it back. We've had to like
Yeah,
reconquer it. It's like a battle sometimes. And then once you get it right, I feel like it's a lot more fun to be at work because as a founder, you live at that startup. That's you're there all the
totally.
time. You're always thinking about it. It's your baby. And I feel like, do you think a founder that has a culture that they built authentically from their own values, they're gonna be able to last and enjoy the process more? Like, is that a benefit that you get out of having a culture like that?
I hope so. I mean, if you're doing it in a way that you think is going to be really effective for the company and reflects what you care about, it's going to be way more fun to show up at work. So that's that's what I think. But people, everyone has their own motivation as well.
Yeah. Well, one of our values at Intrinio is we value making mistakes, kind of like the
Mm.
magic school bus, get messy, make mistakes, and because we learn from them and we evolve by trying new things, even if they don't always work out. Can you give us a little bit of your founder real talk about, the things that you wish you would have avoided? Like, what are some of those pitfalls, like, that you help other startups now to not make the same mistakes you did?
Yeah. I mean, I think a big one for me was around head, heart, gut alignment and really trusting my instincts. And this goes back to kind of authentic leadership. But one thing I found was that as brought on, we were able to bring on way more qualified leaders and qualified executives. They knew way more than I did about their domain, right? And that's a really privileged place to be within in a startup when you can hire folks like that. But I found that when you know, they would propose something or do something, and I'd have this like instinctual reaction against it. I couldn't give an answer. And at that time, I thought that a leader needed to have all of the answers. And because I couldn't do it, I just kind of suppressed it. And what I realized is it typically didn't work out for whatever reason. And so first I started listening to that gut reaction. And even if my head couldn't translate it into a perfect answer, it meant something, right? Um, and I realized the better way to do that was to trust my instinct and say, "Hey, have you thought about this? Or there could be a pitfall here. How would you approach it?" And we collaborate towards an endpoint, towards an answer, and that always ended up way more successful because either I knew our customer base better, or I knew some element of the company better where there'd be issues, and maybe I couldn't come up with the best X campaign, right? But I could point out some of the problem areas, and we could get to a better outcome. And so that was a really, really big lesson for me was listen to your gut, even if you don't know how to translate it, and just have that alignment across you. And I just found myself to be a much, much more effective leader after I did that.
Wow. I think it takes a lot of confidence to do that, to say, like, I can't tell you exactly why this is a bad idea, but having the confidence to say, like, my gut's telling me this is wrong, and
Yeah.
I'm not gonna let us make a terrible decision, but I'm also not gonna just overrule anybody who disagrees with me, but we're gonna have a discussion about it. Where did you find the confidence for that? I mean, that takes a lot of guts.
I mean, part of it was I worked with an exec coach, and I would highly recommend it for anyone. Just it helps you understand that no one's perfect, understand your own weaknesses and kind of why you're doing it. So that was a
Mm,
big thing for me. And I think the other was just seeing that things weren't right before I was doing that. So if I didn't
mm,
trust my instincts, or I was trying to do something to overcompensate for it, it would usually get messy somewhere, right? And so
mm.
it was through back to your value, right? It was back through learning through some of my mistakes around not doing that that I realized it was important. And I needed to get past, the concept that a leader needs to have all of the answers. Like that was a big crutch for me for whatever
Mhm.
reason. But after I realized that wasn't important, but I needed to listen to what was going on, um, reorienting around that just made us a lot more successful.
Wow. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it brings me back to that authentic leadership style. And you can go on Netflix and watch documentaries about startup cultures gone awry, and I feel like they put their leaders on these pedestals when they do that. That they have all the answers. It's all about them. They're going to be some sort of like savior to the company, and everything they say goes. But it's not really authentic. It's much more authentic to just to go with your gut and say, like, this person's building a company a certain way that's going to have its own brand and its own decision making, relying on their leadership, but they're not perfect and they're a human being.
Totally. And I think we've seen a lot of those leaders were not perfect either. And that was
Right.
probably their own authentic leadership style as well. I mean, it got them to a pretty crazy place from a achievement perspective, but it wasn't for everyone. And there may have been broader flaws. So, I think that going back though, I mean, I think especially at the time when I was running Aslet, there were all of these just archetypical, you know, super aggressive, super decisive, maybe even beyond data kind of CEOs, and I just it didn't resonate with me. I knew I didn't have all of the answers all of the time, and that's where you have a team, and I think you get to much more sustainable outcomes by working, with everyone.
Yes, I love it, and it makes a lot of sense to me. So, online, we're gonna take it out here, and again, if you're listening in a FinVenture studio, if you want to check out their fund. But what are your last insights for anybody who's just starting out? They're thinking about launching a company. They've got an idea, and they're listening to the show, and they want to get to the point where they're pitching you. They've got to get their idea in front of a VC. What are your tips for them to like what sets the successful companies that you end up investing in apart from the ones that aren't, and how can people get started on the right path if they're just getting going?
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, I think define your problem space. What are you trying to solve? And the more that you can go out and get feedback and data on that, especially from the market, is going to be really helpful, because that means that you're kind of informing it and getting feedback and maybe even pivoting before you fully start. But I think that's super important. And then make sure that that ties to a bigger vision. what could this be at one point? And then the third thing is just make sure you're really passionate about it, that you have, a good team or a good potential team. And I think those three things combined are the really important building blocks.
It's awesome advice. Thanks for coming on the show, Cameron.
Thank you for having me. It's great to chat.